This is the most authentic wilderness survival challenge. No time limits, no camera crew, and only 10 pieces of gear. 8 survivors are dropped at Lake Alta within the Arctic Circle. Here they must build shelters, find food, and prevent unexpected incidents using their robust survival skills. The last one standing wins $500,000. As the dinghy approaches the shore, each contestant is placed at their starting point. The first contestant, Gio, with his thick beard, appears to be a formidable survival expert. Watching the production team leave signifies reliance on oneself for the coming days. Gio has always loved nature since his youth, feeling safe in the wilderness. He entered the competition hoping to win money for his son's marriages. Just minutes after landing, Gio spots a nearby creek, a great sign for finding food. He quickly decides on a shelter location and sets up a waterproof tarp for the night. To gain an early advantage, Gio meticulously scans the lakeside, then strips and enters the water with a fishing net. After setting it up across the lake, he quickly dresses to avoid hypothermia, looking forward to a potential feast tomorrow. The second contestant, Rasmus, lands and uses a compass to find the sunrise direction, choosing a slightly elevated flat area for his camp. A 24-year-old industrial technician from Hylar, Rasmus treasures his second-hand RV where he manages all his daily needs. Passionate about nature due to regular outdoor trips, he joined the contest to challenge himself. After securing a fallen branch for his shelter and covering it with a tarp, everything is set. Since everything is damp on arrival, Rasmus plans to drink some cold water and sleep, postponing food concerns until the next day. Jette is the oldest contestant this season, now 54 years old. After landing, she briefly explored her surroundings and found a flat spot between tree branches. Jette decided to build her shelter there, bending the branches down and covering them with a waterproof tarp. Although it wasn't visually pleasing, it was sufficient to keep out the rain. Before the competition, Jette lived on an island with her husband, enjoying a peaceful life of horse riding and walks. She joined the competition because she was bored after retiring, aiming just to make the top 3 rather than win. When the sky cleared, Jette emerged from her tent. She needed to build a fire quickly to avoid freezing at night. Unfortunately, everything was wet, and hundreds of strikes of the flint produced no sparks. She had to accept the situation. The fourth contestant, Burke, had served in the military for over 30 years. As a veteran, his survival skills should be decent. However, after landing, he spent half an hour without deciding on a shelter spot, and eventually settled for a makeshift one with random branches. Later, he scouted the lake, but still couldn't set a clear goal after 2.5 hours. Back home in Edwardsville, Burke was proud of his military past, often looking at old photos and dreaming of missions. He joined the competition for the thrill reminiscent of his service days. The next day, Burke realized he was soaked through after sleeping at the campsite. With the weather improving, he started building a permanent shelter, constructing a tripod with logs and covering it with a tarp. After finishing, he began planning for the next day. Meanwhile, Gio, another contestant, found a straight bamboo pole near the lake in the morning, perfect for a fishing rod. However, he prioritized checking his fishing net first. With high hopes, he retrieved his net from the lake, catching 2 small fish halfway through and ending up with 4. Excited about his catch, Gio returned to camp to cook. But despite numerous attempts, he couldn't ignite his tinder due to the damp environment, which frustrated him immensely. After pausing to think, he eventually started eating sashimi, which tasted quite good. Coming to Rasmus, he woke up feeling well in the morning after a peaceful night in his tent. Rasmus decided to set up his fishing net first, as fish were the easiest food source here. He chopped a sturdy tree trunk nearby, initially intending to secure the net to it. However, after reconsidering, he found it inappropriate and spent the morning until the afternoon building 2 tripods from over a dozen tree trunks. To an onlooker, it looked like he was constructing a fishing platform. Eddie, the 5th contestant to appear, had already set up his tent. He postponed dealing with food to avoid staying soaked in the rain and started attempting to make a fire. Luckily, he had gathered some dry tinder upon landing and, after hundreds of strikes of his flint, successfully created a roaring fire. Back in Price Bay, Eddie had been a zookeeper. Disliking animal management, he spent his free time doing crafts and occasional barbecues at home. Hence, his biggest challenge in the competition was not getting enough to eat. Taking advantage of the clear weather after the rain, Eddie went to his backyard to pick blueberries for breakfast. While eating and picking, he soon had a full stomach. However, on his way back to camp, he discovered a pile of black bear dung, startling him, especially since it was less than 100 meters from his campsite. On the third day, the sixth contestant, Astrid, skillfully set up her tent, but accidentally cut the back of her hand. It was rare for a contestant to start with an injury, but fortunately, it was only a minor skin wound. After cleaning up, she quickly started a campfire, completing the basic survival elements. Astrid then planned to check the fishing net by the lake, as delicious protein was essential for a good life. Back in Odense, Astrid was a devoted outdoor cyclist and loved traveling to remote places for adventures, making her confident about this competition. Just as she reached the lake, she was thrilled to see movement under the water. Carefully, she retrieved the fishing net, processing the first wild trout just as another quickly followed, impressively large. After pulling all the nets up, Astrid successfully harvested significant protein, but the nets had several large holes, making repairs a challenge. Shauna is the seventh contestant this season. She is currently figuring out how to obtain fish. To facilitate setting up a gill net, she tied her plastic mat to it as a float. Then she took her gear to the lake and threw the net with all her strength. However, due to the strong wind and waves, she struggled to achieve the desired effect. Before officially joining the competition, Shauna was a professional kayaker who had dominated the sport in her youth. Although now retired, she still loves outdoor activities. At 51, she signed up for the competition despite her family's objections. With a strong competitive spirit from her athletic career, she is determined to outlast the other contestants and win the championship. Returning to camp to calm herself down, Shauna knew she couldn't keep going hungry. So, she decided to make a simple floating device to fish in the center of the lake. She grabbed a saw and quickly began working, spending half a day sawing off a small piece of wood and fixing some stakes on it to secure ropes. After all this effort, she returned to the lake. Despite throwing the makeshift device into the water many times, it failed to reach far. Meanwhile, Rasmus is reaping the rewards of his efforts. Excitedly, he hauled his gill net ashore and was surprised to catch a 2.5-pound fish, hurried back to camp to cook. Only after he was full did Rasmus truly appreciate the importance of fish. From now on, maintaining a daily catch could greatly increase his chances of winning. On the fourth day, Eddie built a wooden raft for fishing. Though too small to sit on, he tied one end of the gill net to it and pushed it towards the center of the lake. Concerned about its buoyancy, he added an inflatable neck surround provided by the crew, hoping it would drift farther and spread the net underwater. At Yetta's camp, while others were already eating delicious fish, she hadn't even set up her gill net. Looking at the holes in her gloves, Yetta cut them out to use as a pulley, making it easier to pull the ropes. She fixed one end of the net on a tree branch and then wound it along the shore to the opposite bank. In no time, she had set up her gill net and now just had to wait for the fish to come to her. Lars, the last contestant to appear, found many old wooden planks on the shore a few days ago. Although the planks were not very useful, the nails in them were valuable. After removing them, he knew they would come in handy. As a seasoned public school teacher, Lars teaches students outdoor survival skills. He has always loved nature, which is why he prefers working outdoors. He prepared extensively for the competition, even training in rock climbing, fearing his students would laugh at him if he didn't win. In no time, Lars removed dozens of nails and quickly crafted a chair from the planks, which fit perfectly in his campsite. Afterward, he went out to look for food. Searching carefully along a creek, Lars found a spiky plant root, a childhood delicacy with a sweet and sour taste that could replenish a lot of energy. He also gathered some fennel and took it back to camp, where he cooked it with half a piece of fish for lunch. So far, Lars's progress was satisfactory. On day 5, the situation at Burke's camp was not optimistic. Having caught no protein for 5 consecutive days, he was desperate. The continuous rain for 5 days had dampened his spirits and made it difficult for him to work. Crossing the river left him gasping for breath. Once he reached the opposite bank, he quickly set up his gill net. Sitting by the lake afterward, he felt utterly out of his element, regretting his 30 years as a soldier when a little wind and rain defeated him. As hunger became unbearable in the afternoon, Burke went to check the gill net. Perhaps out of pity, the net had caught 2 small fish, smaller than his palm, but enough to stave off hunger. Just as he was about to go back for a pot, he slipped and fell hard, lying on the ground unable to move. Despite his efforts, he couldn't get up and, fearing for his life, called for rescue. A speedboat arrived quickly, and he had been waiting on the shore for a long time. The initial medical assessment suggested possible rib issues and recommended an X-ray at the hospital. Hearing this, Burke exploded with frustration. Just as things were looking up and he hadn't even eaten the fish, he had to withdraw due to this injury. Accepting this harsh reality, he reluctantly headed home early. By day 5, only 7 contestants remained. Gio is probably the contestant with the most food so far. A quick check of his gill net reveals 7 or 8 fish. He hurries to fry them until golden brown on both sides. However, the thick smoke from the stove makes it impossible for him to keep his eyes open. After quickly enjoying his lunch, Gio decides to modify his stove. Living in a shelter that leaks air from all sides, he would freeze without a fireplace. Thus, building a fireplace becomes his top priority. He puts on a large backpack and heads to the river to collect stones. He brings them back to the camp and builds the fireplace bit by bit, filling the joints with sand. Soon, the fireplace is complete. He takes out a small piece of cotton he collected as tinder. With the friction of flint, it soon produces blue smoke. He quickly starts a campfire to test it out. The smoke quickly fills the entire campsite, making it unbearable. Gio has to step outside to check the situation. According to him, there is still room for improvement. If necessary, he might build a chimney later. Today, Eddie plans to relocate his shelter. He has grown tired of living in a house smaller than 3 square meters. While moving, a reindeer suddenly runs across the hill opposite. Faced with this delivered deer meat, Eddie lacks the courage to hunt it. He checks his gill net at the lake but catches nothing, not even a fish scale. He resets the net, believing it will definitely catch fish this time. Sure enough, by afternoon, he sees something in the net even before reaching the lake. He eagerly retrieves it, and as each fish surfaces, Eddie's excitement is indescribable. He ultimately catches 7 wild trout in one go. He collects some dry bark as fuel for the fire. Soon, he is sitting on the shore enjoying the delicious grilled fish. Astrid, meanwhile, finds a plank on the shore while collecting materials. Its uses in the wilderness are evident. It takes her most of the day to carry it back to camp. Astrid decides to first expand her shelter. Using climbing skills practiced for 2.5 years, she quickly stretches the waterproof cloth to its maximum, instantly enlarging the tent. She then goes to the lake to collect materials to reinforce the shack. Whether it's wooden planks or tree roots, she carries them all back to camp. After more than an hour of continuous work, she finally reinforces one wall. Then she brings over a few branches to cover it, protecting herself from the wind at night. Finally, after packing up all her belongings, Astrid moves into her new home. Jette finally reached the day to check her gill net. Having not eaten protein for 5 days, she was starving. Eagerly, she went to the lakeside and started to pull up the net. To her surprise, the more she pulled, the more fish appeared, nearly too heavy for her to lift with both hands. The haul excited Jette so much she couldn't stop smiling. After carefully counting, she had caught 10 wild trout. Returning to camp, Jette immediately started cooking, consuming 7 fish in one sitting until she couldn't eat anymore. It seemed impossible for her to stockpile food. As an older person, enjoying the moment was enough. By day 6, Rasmus slept until noon. Since tasting fish, he looked forward to checking his gill net daily. However, when he checked the net at the lake, he was disappointed to only find a small fish, not the catch he had hoped for. Worried about possibly not catching any fish in the future, he took his water bottle and went up the mountain to gather berries, hoping this would reduce pressure on the gill net. As time passed, Rasmus's mindset began to change, often reflecting on life during dull moments. It seemed he might not last much longer. The next morning, he returned to the lake and was lucky to catch 2 small fish, discarding the heads and only cooking the most delicious parts. Jette always felt tired. She wondered if it was due to her age, needing to sit and rest after just a little activity. Not wanting to continue living in a cramped shelter, Jette planned to build a larger tent nearby. However, this physical labor proved too much for her, and she started feeling dizzy after a few attempts. Clearly, Continuing this way would compromise her health. On day 10, a yacht broke the lake's silence. Both contestants, feeling negative, contemplated quitting. As the yacht slowly approached, Yetta had been waiting at the shore for a long time. After experiencing 10 days of wilderness life, she realized she couldn't physically handle it and didn't want to suffer any consequences. After much thought, she decided it was better to leave early and leave opportunities to the younger ones. Finally, packing her bags, Yetta regretfully withdrew from the competition. Meanwhile, over at Shauna's side, each day she can only lie on the ground and eat berries to survive. For her, making it to day 10 was already a personal goal achieved, but she still wanted to challenge herself and aimed to eat her first fish in this environment. She continued to check her gill net at the lake, not hoping for a large catch, just enough to satiate her hunger. Eventually, she caught a small fish, which thrilled her immensely. She processed it on the spot and could finally enjoy a meal of sizzling grilled fish, feeling a moment of happiness. Switching to Astrid, she seems to be the best off among the female contestants. She even planned to set up a comfortable single bed for herself, aiming to improve her quality of life in the wild. After setting everything up, she went to the lake to check her gill net. Perhaps due to the location, she effortlessly caught 18 wild fish, securing enough food for half a month. She cleaned the innards by the river and smoked the fish on sticks, claiming the title of the season's fish queen. By day 12, Rasmus had not caught any fish for several days, which demotivated him completely. As a young man, he took this setback hard. According to him, he should not have signed up for the show. After sitting on the mountain and thinking for 2.5 hours, he finally decided to call the show's crew. As the yacht slowly approached, Rasmus felt exhilarated to see people again. Unable to stay in a place without food, he eagerly packed his bags and went home. On day 13, only 5 contestants remained. Eddie's situation was not optimistic. Despite having enough food each day, he constantly missed his family, used charcoal as toothpaste to maintain oral hygiene even in the wild. After getting ready, he went to check his gill net on the shore, but unfortunately, he hadn't caught any fish for several days. With no other choice, he returned to camp empty-handed, dreading having to eat blueberries again to stave off hunger. During berry picking, he also collected some juniper berries to crush for their unique scent, hoping to attract fish. In the meantime, he kept busy with crafts at the camp entrance to distract himself from missing his family. In the afternoon, despite rough waters, his gill net finally caught 2 small fish. Just as he was processing the fish, Eddie started to feel chest pain and headaches, which was not a good sign. Gio, although he didn't catch many fish, eating one a day was still manageable. He returned to camp to gather some berries, making do for the day. Considering that using a gill net might no longer be effective, Gio decided to create a fishing rig. He had found a curved tree root a few days earlier, perfect for making a reel. Equipped, he hurried to the lake to test it out, using another stick to help cast the line. He had hoped for a quick catch, but after standing by the lake for 2.5 hours, he ended up catching nothing, which was disappointing. Let's start with Astrid. She has achieved an abundance of fish. A casual check by the lake revealed at least 20 fish to start with. Underwater, the sight was even more impressive. One plump wild fish after another was caught. She counted a total of 23 fish carefully. Back at camp, she immediately began to enjoy the delicious meal. After eating her fill, there were still many fish left on the branches. Honestly, she no longer felt the need to exert herself and decided to just lie down and enjoy life. Moving to Eddie, his constant sense of loneliness brought him near the edge of breaking down. He cooked the last of his few remaining fish for breakfast. Initially, he thought to divide it into 3 meals, but he ended up eating it all in one go. As for the fish he caught afterward, Eddie didn't save any as emergency food. Perhaps out of desperation, he started cooking right on the shore. After eating his fill, he just lay down on the ground. Over with Shauna. After finally replenishing some energy, Shauna decided to check out the scenery on the mountain. She gulped down some cold water from a wild stream and insisted her decision was the right one. After enjoying the view, she packed her large backpack and returned to camp. So far, Shauna's weight had dropped significantly. If she couldn't catch any fish, it would be hard for her to last until the end. Lars also exhibited puzzling behavior, neglecting food gathering to go mountain viewing with his backpack daily. Unlike the others, once he started climbing, he couldn't stop. Young people really do have energy. After wandering the mountain for over 3 hours, he was exhausted and drank some cold water from a stream. Back at camp, Lars didn't rest. After sweating from a day's climb, he filled a large waterproof bag with water and poured in the already heated water, preparing to bathe at camp. Notably, he even had shampoo, which he claimed to have found by the lake on day 4. Judging from the smell, it seemed still usable, so he no longer had to worry about an itchy scalp. Astrid woke up with her hair looking like a wasp's nest. After half a month without washing, she even considered braiding her dirty hair. She decided to upgrade her living quality by moving the existing firewood aside and started paving the floor with stones, quickly completing the task. Of course, her camp also featured a kitchen corner. On day 15, Astrid was singing while checking her fishing nets. Meanwhile, Geo also arrived at the lake. However, their results were always mediocre. Geo sadly caught only 1 fish, while Astrid consistently caught at least 8. Her daily haul quickly made her fall in love with the place, confident that if this pace continued, she would surely win. Over at Eddie's camp, he picked some juniper leaves by the lake in the morning and boiled them until they were steaming. Initially, it seemed he might use them for tea, but instead he started washing up with them. The leaves, rich in plant oils, were supposedly good for cleaning off dirt. After his bath, he felt quite revitalized, lying on a rock, soaking up the sun and reflecting on life. By day 16, the arrival of a yacht signaled that another contestant could no longer continue. Eddie had been waiting on the shore for a long time. According to him, food was not the reason for his withdrawal. He simply couldn't bear the loneliness and preferred to go home to his family. Ultimately, he packed up and regretfully left the competition. On day 17, only 4 contestants remained. In the middle of the night, Geo suddenly heard noises at the campsite. Grabbing a flashlight, he went to investigate and found a small frog on his tent. Seizing this unexpected source of protein, he promptly put it in a pot. The next morning, he took the frog he had kept overnight to the lake. Just when it seemed the frog might escape, Geo quickly dispatched it with an axe, discarding the upper body but keeping the tasty legs for lunch. In just a few minutes, the delicious aroma filled the air. Geo couldn't wait to eat outside, enjoying the roasted frog. Although the small amount of meat was hardly enough, it was a nice change after so many days. Meanwhile, Shauna was likely faring the worst so far, having eaten only 3 fish since the start. Today was another day to check the fishing nets. Perhaps fortune smiled on her as she easily caught a small fish, but had no luck at the second net, which was cleaner than her face. Shauna found it extremely difficult to survive here. She cleaned the fish by the lake, preparing another good meal of wilderness cuisine. As the weather grew colder, she returned to camp shivering, so she quickly did some exercises to warm up and improve her circulation. Afterward, she started cooking today's lunch. Normally, she should have felt happy after eating, but instead, Shauna sat in her camp, overwhelmed by loneliness and the struggle to find food, causing the 50-something-year-old woman to shed tears. Given the circumstances, it seems she might not last much longer in the competition. Lars has recently upgraded his shelter, improving both wind and rain resistance. He's also fully furnished the inside, while useless clutter is piled outside. Afterward, he went to the shore to check his gill nets. After checking 2 nets, he only caught a small fish, which was disappointing. Lars then went up the mountain to pick blueberries, as the small fish was hardly enough even for a snack. As the nets were yielding less, he decided to build a wooden fishing device. After measuring and cutting the wood, he worked hard to create a wooden float and attach a hook. At the lake, he baited the hook and let it drift, hoping it would catch something sizable in the lake center. Astrid, one of the best-developed contestants, spends her spare time crafting at camp. She uses handmade items as cups and other utensils. After finishing, she went to check her gill nets, already smiling as she approached, because she knew it was another successful day. Indeed, she easily pulled in 6 fish. Considering the smoke from cooking at camp stung her eyes, she decided to hang smoked meat on the roof and cut a large hole in the waterproof fabric with a knife, using birch bark and leaves to direct the smoke outside, allowing her to cook without smoke risk. On day 18, Geo started his mountain hike, aware that most who climb tend to quit. After packing a heavy backpack and picking up some deer antlers along the way, he reached the peak in 2.5 hours. Overwhelmed by the beauty, back to Lars, his fishing device caught nothing, prompting him to change locations. He chose a river he had seen while mountain climbing days before. After packing, he quickly set off, planning to camp in the mountains for several nights. The fog thickened, nearly rendering his compass useless. Relying on memory, he found the right direction and followed a stream uphill. After over 3 hours, he reached a broad inland lake, exhausted and ready to rest. As night fell, Lars lit a campfire and settled in for the night. The sky displayed beautiful auroras, a marvel of nature. Waking up the next morning, his sleeping bag was covered in frost, indicating the severe cold. After packing up, he went to the lakeside with his fishing hook, quickly catching a fish. This area seemed richer in resources than the lower mountain areas. Over to Astrid, despite the freezing morning temperatures making it hard to move her hands, the joy of her catch was exhilarating. She carefully hauled her gill net ashore. With the colder weather, today's catch was small, only 4 or 5 fish. Meanwhile, Shanna, shivering from the cold, warmed up by doing calisthenics. She had good luck today, catching a large, small fish, and after cooking, she ate it right there, the fullness giving her hope to continue. Geo, perhaps out of boredom, built a signal fire by the lake and lit a bonfire, singing as he watched the flames. As the fire died down, so did his patience. The next morning, a yacht slowly approached from the lake. Another contestant couldn't endure anymore. As it docked, Geo, initially confident, had greeted it with a smile. Over time, his mindset shifted. The days felt meaningless, risking depression. He decided it was better to leave early than continue suffering, packing up and regretfully exiting the competition. By day 21, only 3 contestants remained. After catching several large fish the previous day, Lars decided to pack and return to his original spot. Staying high up wasn't sustainable. Carrying a 50-kilogram backpack, he set off, discovering many wild dandelions along the way. According to survival guides, dandelion stems are excellent for detoxifying and cooling the body. He ate several, hoping to energize. After over 3 hours of trekking, Lars finally returned to camp. The next morning, Lars was first to the shore to check his gill net. As he pulled, the net grew heavier, successfully yielding 2 large, small fish. Meanwhile, Shanna also had a successful catch, reeling in 2 protein-rich fish. She then cooked lunch in her open-air kitchen, and soon a feast was ready. Shanna wasted none of the hard-earned protein, even licking the pot clean. After eating her fill, she took her walking stick and enjoyed a leisurely stroll up the mountain. Over with Astrid, she woke up one morning and unexpectedly started crying. Despite having the most food reserves among the contestants, she realized that without a good mental state, even plentiful food wouldn't suffice. To overcome this mood, Astrid decided to pack her gear and hike the mountain to relax. Walking and admiring the scenery helped improve her spirits. Reaching the summit, she built a symbolic totem of stones and realized the importance of not pushing herself too hard, lest she miss out on the beautiful surroundings. Lars, meanwhile, checked his fishing net before nightfall, but caught nothing due to the strong winds and waves. A lack of fish meant no food, which could soon force him out of the competition. However, his mindset remained unchanged, hoping to maintain this until the end of the contest. By day 23, Lars woke to find his tent collapsed due to strong winds. He had planned to search for protein that day, but now he had to prioritize fixing his shelter. He moved his belongings aside to avoid freezing at night. He had to rebuild his shelter within the day. Before starting work, he checked his fishing net at the lake, but found it tangled with seaweed and damaged due to the waves. Today, it seemed he was destined to work on an empty stomach. He collected logs, sawed them to equal lengths, tied them into a tripod formation, and constructed a circular frame for his shelter. Then Lars decided to repair his fishing gear, crucial for survival in this remote location. Before nightfall, he hurriedly covered his shelter with a waterproof tarp, though he knew the high tent was prone to being blown over, leaving its fate to luck. On day 24, a sudden storm swept across the lakeside. Astrid had just returned from checking her fishing net by the lake and was surprised to catch only 1 fish. The reason was clear. The weather had played havoc. The net in the water had been twisted into a mess by the wind, making it impossible to catch fish. Meanwhile, Shanna hurried to prepare her camp for the impending storm, sawing wood and chopping firewood in a frenzy. Exhausted, she realized she couldn't go on without eating. She quickly made a fire back at camp and cooked the half fish left from the morning. Lars, seeking fish, decided to make a lure hook using a mineral water bottle as a reel. He quickly went to the lake with his gear, but stood on the shore for 2.5 hours without catching anything, his face freezing in the worsening weather. Frustrated, Lars returned to his camp, worrying that the wind might blow over his leaky shelter at night. With the weather forcing the contestants to stay in their shelters, their mental state was put to the test. By day 25, a contestant was already struggling. Astrid had come to the shore early, and upon seeing the crew, she broke down in tears, overwhelmed by having lasted over 20 days alone. She felt she could have won if not for her mental struggles, despite having enough fish stored earlier. Ultimately, Astrid packed her bags and regretfully left the competition. Now only 2 contestants remained. Lars checked his fishing net early each day, his life revolving around fishing. As he pulled all his nets ashore, the colder weather had driven the fish into deeper waters, and he found nothing. At the same time, Shauna faced difficulties. Still without fish, she decided to call it quits. The crew had just left but had to return quickly. After an emotional hug, Shauna admitted she withdrew, not because of a lack of food, but due to her mental state after being on the island for so long. By day 26, only Lars remained. He was still trying to catch fish, and perhaps luck was on his side as he caught a big fish while retrieving his net, enough to last another few days. Meanwhile, the crew brought Lars's family to the site. Following the usual health check, and as he began an interview, his wife and children approached from behind. Learning that he was the season's winner, Lars was thrilled as expected. He then showed his family around his living area, packed his bags, and celebrated his victory. Congratulations to Lars for winning the season.